Hi, my name's Thomas Brown. We're here with Daniel Williams, who's running for City Council in Eugene for Ward 1. Um, uh, I'm with SAN and Lonnie, in the red shirt. He's with ESSN, and we're a nonprofit organization. We are not affiliated with any groups, and we're not endorsing anyone. We're making this platform available for these candidates so that they can get their word out. Um, would you like to make a statement, Daniel?
Sure, thank you. And by the way, I do prefer going by my middle name, Liev.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
sorry I didn't mention that at the
yeah,
beginning.
no problem.
Um, so yeah, I am a city council candidate for Ward 1, and I am a solidarity platform candidate. What that means is I'm running alongside Candace King, who's also running for the ward position, and also for a number of people running for the mayoral candidate. And we are a group of people who've been very concerned this election, and even in previous elections, about not just the individuals running for city council, but for the city council in general, um, being a more of a hindrance than a help to solving a number of critical issues facing the Eugene community. We've had the housing crisis situation and affordability in Eugene, and a lack of action for drastic changes needed to adapt to climate change that have not been happening. And it hasn't just been this city council, but past city councils. And so our platform, and the reason we're running, is we're trying to create a change in how people think about the elections, and approach the electoral process. We are serious candidates, but we're running on very low budgets, and we're trying mostly to communicate with voters rather than trying to say the things that will get us the most votes from every person.
All
Outstanding.
right,
So why don't we kick off with the first question? Why don't I start off with the first question we got here?
take
So
it
it doesn't take
away.
cool. It doesn't take a Ouija board or crystal ball to see the current recession that the current recession will exacerbate Eugene's affordable housing crisis and force even more residents onto the streets. If you're elected, how are you going to respond to the immediate spike in homelessness and housing instability? And what measures will you take over the long term to help Eugene with those problems?
Well, unfortunately, the solution to resolving an increase, I think, has been the same as it always has, which is to focus on getting people housing first. And a housing first initiative is a policy that's been implemented by a number of U.S. cities, not during a crisis, but I think even after this and even during, um, is still valid. What it does mean, though, is because of the urgency that we would need as a city, we would need emergency funding from state and federal sources to establish, and there's a wide variety of options, but basically anything that can provide shelter, including even temporary shelters like Quonset huts, or emergency tents, just anything that can get people inside. Um, this should be able should have the funds to purchase these and can use city land to erect them. And then while people are in this very temporary shelter, work on more permanent solutions such as property buyback, developing more opportunity village sites, and working with realtors and real estate to get people into homes. I think especially with a state of emergency, I think the city is in a pretty good bargaining position to force landowners, and especially realtors from larger apartment complexes, to get their prices down so that it's actually affordable for people, not just for people in need of desperate need of housing, but for the entire city. So to negotiate with them as a government unit, and also to work on aggressively funding the housing authority to provide long-term subsidies and assistance so that people can have those Section 8 funds more widely available.
All right. I guess a follow-up on that would be, I mean, when we talk about emergency funding from the state and the feds, how money for, because obviously we would need money for, Section 8 vouchers, things like that. I think it relates to the COVID stuff here. If we're looking at, I mean, they're talking that we may have, a major, not just a recession, but a depression, significant depression. Have you thought anything about what we would do? I mean, if that money's not available, how we can respond to that? I know it's pretty recent stuff, with all this, but just curious if that's milling about in your head there at all.
So that's an excellent point. Thank you for asking, Lonnie. So another thing I'm hoping to emphasize as a candidate is, so I just talked about kind of big picture stuff, getting funding and all that, which is something a city council person can do, but something that we can be doing right now, although it's difficult, but certainly after quarantine lifts as well, is also organize as a community. We can use our powers of community. I unfortunately don't have time to go into details, but to force landowners to lower housing. There are a wide variety of creative options available to get people into homes that they can stay in, using public power, pressure, even renter strikes, to use the enormous economic leverage renters have in order to make housing affordable. But that requires a lot of community organizing, and I know ESSN has been working on a renters union, which I think is very much needed in the city, and is something that's been having some success in Portland. As like many crises, the faster we can, it's hard to work quickly, but the faster we can develop these, the more options we have, and the better those most at need will end up.
Okay.
We've got a little bit of time if you want to touch on some of those solutions that you were saying there that you didn't think we had time for. If you want to, 5 minutes, you go ahead.
Well, renter unions, I was actually involved in a little bit of organizing with that on an attempt to get that going, which unfortunately didn't lift off locally. A big problem with renter unions is a lot of people like the idea of being able to have the security and solidarity with other renters in order to negotiate as a large group with landowners and property owners. But that group needs to be able to has to be large enough in order to make promises that, like, if there is a strike, we have your back and we will help pay your rent, or we will, blockade the police when they try to evict you or something like that. Being able to mobilize and organize on a large scale is essential for a renters union to be effective. Another possibility is, at the moment, evictions are being suspended. Now, people are still legally responsible for paying their rents and mortgages, but I think there are ways to leverage. So if someone simply cannot afford because they're out of work or they're on unemployment, they can't afford rent. This is not something I'm advocating as an individual, because that's dangerous to do. But if people were to organize large rent strikes, or paying less than what is required of them for rent, and then leaning on the eviction ban to prevent landowners from using that threat to extract rent from people who can't afford it, that is a possibility. But again, I don't think people should just decide not to pay their rent. It has to be organized on a large scale, or it can put people in a lot of danger.
Yes, as a matter of necessity, maybe. I don't know.
Yes.
So some of these temporary rules will go away. The eviction ban, that'll go away as soon as possible. So you still might be hanging out there, you know.
Yep. You want to move on to the next question, Tom, too?
Sure. Yeah, last June, the city council voted to implement payroll tax in Eugene. They also decided that to refer to, not to refer it to not to refer this controversial tax to the voters. What is your stance on the payroll tax? And do you agree with the council's decision not to allow the voters to weigh in on it?
So, in principle, I'm not anti-tax, and a payroll tax is a possible tax. Wasn't thrilled that it was only targeted at public employees because a lot of those folks are underpaid for the kind of work they do when looked at the larger employment markets. But there's some practical matters about why it makes sense to do it only employees, that sort of thing. What I really don't like about it is that this was a tax that was levied to exclusively fund, well, not exclusively, but to primarily fund the police, and there was like a few $1,000s thrown at other emergency services, but mostly to hire new police and pay for and maintain equipment. And mostly implicitly, sometimes explicitly, this is mainly to continue the Eugene's failed policy of harassing homeless people and to try to make the problem look invisible. And this is, when I was talking about failed policies in the past, this is a huge one. Eugene's been pursuing this completely ridiculous and outrageous policy for 20 years. It hasn't ever worked. It does not reduce homelessness. There's not even any evidence it particularly does anything to improve business, if that's all you're concerned about. Instead, if we were going to raise a payroll tax, that should have, all of that should have gone into preventative measures to make housing more affordable and to expand proven effective programs like Opportunity Village to reduce homelessness in the first place.
Cool. Just a little bit of info there. So the payroll tax actually is on all workers, not just city or county workers. What it does exempt city or county from having to pay their portion. The employer has to also pay into the tax, but the city or county doesn't have to. So that.
I misunderstood that. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's actually kind of addressed my concern then about that. I'm embarrassed that I missed that part when I was reading the legislation.
Yeah. So let me move us on to the third question. Let's see here. Third question we have is about affordable housing strategies, which you kind of went over already.
Mm-hmm.
And what approach we should take to solving the housing crisis. I'm thinking it might be better just to move on to the other one. What do you think, Tom? Instead of
go ahead. We can come back. We've got a couple other,
all right.
Cool.
Side note.
Incentivize. This is again a little bit about the housing, but the need to incentivize affordable housing development can place landowners and developers and affordable housing advocates and labor groups at odds. Mm-hmm. How would you manage the conflict between the 1% and the rest of the community? In other words, wealthy people want to build more, they want to make more money. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to take help out us working class people. How are you going to manage those two groups, the 1% and the working class?
Right. Well, I want to throw in, it's not even exactly the 1% because as a low-income person who's looked for housing a number of times in the past few years, it seems like often the most affordable housing is from people who just own one or two properties, and they bought a house or two or a condo or something, and then that's basically their retirement income is renting that out, and that tends to be the lowest rent stuff. And of course, making things different from them would reduce these people's only revenue stream, and would put retired people into hardship. So that's an additional complication. I don't want to make it difficult for retirees to be able to pay for their own housing. I think so. My approach is one, the city has, as a city, representing citizens who want to have housing, the city has a lot of leverage that it hasn't been using to negotiate not just with new development, but existing landowners and renters to force prices. Unfortunately, rent control is illegal in the state of Oregon, and that's not something that can be solved on a city level. But if I was in city council, I would do what I can to try to advocate with our state senator representatives to try to get that removed. So that'd be an enormous tool, but it's not something as city councilor I could do by myself. On a city level, we can, while we can't put caps on renting, we can definitely say you cannot make new housing that will be charged more than this. And it's something I think the city has actually been pretty cowardly on. There's like the MUPTI thing, which actually hasn't resulted in that many units constructed. And other housing has been pretty willy-nilly, and there's been very few. It's just allowing the market to decide what renting it thinks is appropriate. There's also the city can build its own housing, which is expensive and requires bonds. But I think it is, and the city hasn't done that or broached it because it would require some increases in taxes, and it might impact the city's credit rating a little bit. But it's a real long-term solution to have actual city-owned housing that could be run for no profit, so the cost can be kept low. And it's a solution that the city has not investigated, so I can't say how much it would cost, but I think it is something that should definitely be worth pursuing. Yeah.
Cool.
And then in terms of negotiating with the existing landowners and that sort of thing, I for particularly commercial rental properties, so not these people who are owning small individual homes that they're renting out, but for the large apartment complexes or the companies that own, multiple blocks and that sort of thing. I just think they're plain not taxed enough. And I know that's not something that doesn't make me popular with the Chamber of Commerce, but they are making an awful lot of money from the, from gentrification and what I think is an artificial increase in property value. And they need to throw some money back and be taxed. And I would try to argue with them that one of the reasons they should actually support this is that they need people to afford to rent their places. And if they contribute to, for instance, building public housing and keeping housing costs down with subsidies and that sort of thing, it'll actually enable them to rent out to more people in the long run. They're just going to have to wipe a little bit of their short-term profits away.
Okay.
Well, this COVID pandemic is going to put a crimp in the market, I believe. I believe that there's going to be a glut of housing on the market due to people not being able to pay their rent or pay their mortgage and being dumped out on the street if the eviction ban is done away with. That ban only says that they can't be evicted. For non-payment of rent, the rent keeps piling up. If this goes for 2 months, some people are going to be so far underwater that they will not be able to recover. Even if they have a job immediately at the end of 2 months. Yeah. Anyway, that's something else. How do you feel about the panhandling ban? They attempted to pass it, and I think Springfield has passed one.
Mm-hmm.
What are your how do you feel about that? Was it successful or not?
I think it was a pretty blatantly, purely political move to make it look like the city council was doing something against homelessness without doing anything actually resolving why people are on the streets, or increasing safety. There was like minimal of any safety problems with people getting money from cars. It's a hypothetical issue. From what I heard, there was little to no actual reported safety issues with that. It was purely just to get homeless people off of street corners so they weren't as visible, and to make it look like the city was actually doing something. But it solves nothing. It solves a problem that didn't even exist, and it's another part of the Eugene policy of trying to use the power of the city and the police to shuffle people around so that we can't see their suffering.
Okay. Good. So, our last one here. What's your vision? So, can you go on to your vision for the city of Eugene? And if you're elected to city council, what do you feel your goal is to bring that vision to a reality?
Yeah, I would really like a explosion in profusion of community organizations. I'm familiar with the ESSN. I've actually volunteered a little bit with the ESSN in the past, but I want to see more of everything. I want to see more labor groups. I want to see more environmental groups. I want to see more neighborhood associations. I want to see more organizations like the neighborhood anarchists. Even Egan Warming Center, although I've also volunteered with. But community, I strongly believe that a resilience in the community comes not from governments passing ordinances, but from people coming together and figuring out what solutions work for them, sharing the resources that they have. I think there's a place in city government to provide funding so that people, in order to, say, set up a neighborhood food bank, they don't have to be cutting into their own money for food, but they have resources from the city that they can use to purchase, say, kitchen equipment so people can cook better meals, or buy from community gardens, as just one small example. But I think every, not just what we discussed today, but every problem that we faced can be better solved by community-led organizations working with the city to provide stuff. So housing as well. Opportunity Village works. It works really well. And if the city decide, I think part of the problem why it hasn't been expanded is the city feels like it doesn't have enough money to pay people to maintain those areas. So what if instead of paying single persons, the city pitched in, created grants so that people from the community could work there part-time instead of like a full-time job. I'm just throwing ideas out, but that's part of why I mean is with a lot of community groups, lots of people working together on the same ideas, lots of different ideas can be tried out instead of everything having to go through the bottleneck of a city council and city government. And as a city councilor, I would feel my primary job is not to be the one with all the ideas, despite me talking about a lot of ideas here today, but to be listening to community members, hearing what they want to do, and then trying to use what I can from city government to let them do that, to not stand in the way of community organizing, but to empower anyone who wants to work on the community to be able to do that.
Okay. So, you talk about, if you're on the city council, engaging with the community and such.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, our main way to engage is our city council meetings. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people don't feel that those are necessarily effective. We go and talk to, or some of us rail and yell or scream or cry or whatever once a week, and things don't really seem to change. How would you engage with the community? How would you get those ideas? I mean, it seems that the wealthy developers have an awful lot of access, but we only get to see them once a week at that city council meeting. So how would you improve or change the way the city interacts with the community at large?
So, well, for one thing, city council meetings themselves, and I completely agree with you. There's problems here. If the city council is a primary way for an ordinary citizen to interact with a meeting, but they're not very accessible. There's a limited number of people who can be in there at any given time during the week. You have only a small amount of time to talk to city councilors, and there's no interaction with them. I mean, they're required by the mayor effectively, but it's his policy to not respond to anyone who's talking about it. You can't have a discussion with them. And of course, anyone who, for whatever reason, due to they have a family and they can't attend meetings, they have a disability. There's many different kinds of disabilities which would prevent someone from physically walking up to a microphone and speaking for 5 minutes. And so it greatly limits the kind of people who can address the city council. And as you said, but the folks who can lobby, who can send representatives to work sessions and that sort of things, or who are even approached by the city council for opinions because they're a large developer or they represent certain interests. So it's a big problem, and I can't say I have every solution to it. One thing I would like to see, though, is very frequent town hall style meetings with just a single councilor and their ward in public spaces. It's not a complete solution, and also to have much more interaction available using online resources like we're experimenting with right now. So we're finding out just how effective online communications can be. But I would like to see every counselor be required to interact with their constituents more often on a individual basis and actually interact with them, not just hear from them. I think there's also a lot of opportunities, excuse me, again, when I mentioned encouraging community groups, that's just not for the community groups to go and work on a thing. But as people are organizing in a larger collective way, they can then send their own representatives to city council work session meetings and provide input.
Yeah, it's interesting. The traveling to a community organization in your ward,
Mm-hmm.
and talking to the group. That I was thinking that would be a good idea to actually drag a few of counselors from different wards around to talk to people in someone else's ward, just to be humans. 2 years ago, when the county commissioner's race, one of the things that they were talking about as part of their platform, or whatever you want to call it, was to do that, to actually take the county commission out to Florence, go out there and meet, and then meet up in Oak Ridge, in Cottage Grove, out in Coburg, just to move it around so that they were more available to people. But I don't think that ever got off the ground. Do you have anything to add there, Lonnie?
No, I think we're about done. We've hit the 30-minute mark. So, Daniel, do you have a website or a Facebook page that you'd like people to be able to go to learn more about you and about your candidacy?
Yeah. The Solidarity candidate website is www.solidarityplatformeugene.org. I have my own profile there, along with the other Solidarity candidates. We also have a Facebook page, which you can find by searching for Solidarity Platform Eugene, and you should be able to find it. And my email is citizenliev@gmail.com. I've already gotten some emails from people because it's publicly listed when I registered for office. But certainly for myself, I'm happy to hear from people, not just in Ward 1, but throughout Eugene, and hearing what vision they'd want to see. I really think that the city council kind of what I've been saying for this whole interview, needs to be interacting and genuinely engaging with the citizens more, and not just throwing out solutions that work for the business community.
Cool. Two things. So again, ESSN and Solidarity Action Network don't do endorsements. So these are not endorsements. And also, I think I kept calling you Daniel, even though you said Liev during.
Liev, yeah, I wasn't going to say it.
For that. I apologize. You know, I think my gray hair is starting to affect the brain.
Taking root in the brain.
So much for coming on, Liev. I appreciate it. This was really good information. We hope that it helps voters
Yes.
and such. You got anything, Tom?
No. Thank you for coming on, and good luck.
All right.
Cool.
And thank you to. Oh, sorry.
No, I just hope you you give them a good run for their money. You know.
Thank you. And thank you to both of you for putting this on. Being able to communicate with voters like this is very important right now.
All right. Excellent.